Yeah, it will go for an hour. And we actually have 4 presenters with us. So Dr. Sandra Pitcher will be the first one from University of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. We'll talk about Wikipedia. Said what? Who are you? Yes, about that one. Okay. Here, and the third one, Rashid, is not here, so Dr. Dotto will be our second presenter, and then
is actually writing these Wikipedia pages. So just to give you a little bit of background, if it wants to work, obviously not. Oh well, if it doesn't work, that's fine. But anyway, the background that I was going to talk to you about is essentially in the last 6 months, South Africa has gone through a national election. It was our 30-year democracy. And in this election, there were more than 50 political parties on the ballot paper. And this includes 32 new parties that came on since the last election in 2019. So there were a lot of very new parties that most of us didn't know much about. And it tended to be that only the mainstream parties, the African National Congress, that eventually lost its majority for the first time, had information. The main oppositions, the Democratic Alliance, the Economic Freedom Fighters, and the new party known as MK or Mkhonto Sizwe, which didn't even have a party manifesto before the election. So people didn't really know much about them. And as I said, the mainstream press didn't really cover these smaller parties and these new parties because there wasn't any information about them. And so normally what happens when people don't know stuff, they go, oh, I'll do my own research. I'm going to go onto Wikipedia. And what was really interesting at this stage was that even though only 77% of these parties had web pages to get information, every single one of them had a Wikipedia page. So it meant that the only place people could get information was on Wikipedia. So I thought, well, who's writing them? Do we even know who these creators are? What are they telling us? So essentially, the aim of the research, see, I'm not very good at this. Okay, so the aim of the research was who's creating these pages. That was the first thing I wanted to know. Who decides what party players that are making Wikipedia page can create a page. Anybody who wants to go and edit a page can go and edit a page, unless it is locked. There is no South African political party whose page is completely locked. The African National Congress has a semi-protected page, which means that you have to be a registered user. That doesn't matter who you are. You can go and edit. Every other political party, it's open season. The second thing is who's maintaining these pages? Who's editing them? Okay, because often what happens is if you create a page, it doesn't mean that you are responsible for the authorship because other people are adding to it all the time. So essentially what I wanted to do, and I'm going to skip past this. This was a very nice story about why we don't trust Wikipedia and the fact it was a hoax. But Wikipedia has essentially 5 pillars. I've only got 4 there because the first pillar is be an encyclopedia. That's Wikipedia's first pillar. The second pillar is that you need to be the information cannot be original research, and it has to have a verifiable source. So you've got to make sure that it's got a verifiable source. And the way that they categorize it is it has to be something that has been published in a reputable source. So this can be newspapers, it can be journals, academic journals, it can be books, anything like that, broadcasts, YouTube videos, anything that gives some sort of evidence. Now, one area of research that I'm going to be speaking about this impact that this has on indigenous knowledge systems, because it means that it excludes things like oral tradition and oral histories, because it's not verifiable in the way that they talk about it. The second thing is that you've got to keep a neutral point of view as much as possible. And that's to try and keep out the so-called bias. But as I argue in this paper, what does tend to emerge is author bias and editor bias. And it's not something that is overt. Of sources that they're using that end up creating a sort of bias. The third one is really just about being part of the community, be respectful. And then a really important, the fifth pillar, which is really important, is the idea of making your own rules. And the idea behind it is that the community guides the encyclopedia in a way that is flexible, so there are no hard rules in place to stop people from changing the rules, but at the same time, they sort of are rules. And you will find that the more expert you are at the site, the better you know how to navigate these policies, the better you are at navigating these guidelines. So it kind of, it's a little bit of a catch-22. Okay, I'm going to skip my methodology because no one likes methodology, it's boring. But just so you know, I did use a lot of help with computational analysis, and I scraped a lot of Wikipedia using different AI tools. But essentially what we found was that, well, what I found, not we, what I found in this is that just before the elections and after the elections, there was an uptick in user engagement. So it meant people were looking at these parties. In fact, the only party, and unfortunately my little arrow has disappeared, otherwise it would be there and you could see it, but the only party that saw a decline in traffic was the ruling African National Congress. So there is sort of an implication there that maybe people were moving away from the ANC. They wanted to find out more about parties that they weren't sure of previously. So that was kind of the first part of the research. There is definitely something going on here, and it's important to kind of note this because it means there are people wanting and looking at this information because obviously they're not getting it elsewhere. So then I started digging into who these people are. And what I found was that out of the 51 parties that contested the election, and of their wiki, actually only 17 authors. So there were very few authors. And what was most surprising is that there was one particular user who had created more than a third of the political party pages in South Africa. The main parties, the ANC, the Democratic Alliance, the EFF, they were not part of that. What's interesting is that the major parties in South Africa have been created by users outside of South Africa, except for the EFF, which, for those of you that don't know, is a sort of radical left-wing party. And what's really interesting about it is that they were created by the only self-identifying non-binary user. They were a transgendered woman living in Cape Town who created the EFF page, so I think that that's kind of interesting. But what you can really see here and what's really important is that most of them were English, most of them were experience. Okay, I didn't work out, we couldn't find out the race of everyone, but it is important to note that of the black users, people that identified as black, none of them were South African. They were all from outside the country. So it kind of shows that the disadvantaged groups in South Africa are still disadvantaged, and we don't see their voices online in the same sort of way. So I just want to introduce you to a guy called Greenman. Greenman has edited and created, as I said, more than a third. He's now become one of the main editors as well on these pages. Talks about how normally a content creator for a Wikipedia page doesn't maintain the most authorship. People over time overtake that person, and the author is usually lost to history. This is not the case with South African political party pages. Greenman is very much the dominant voice. And what you can see here is also on the right-hand side are all the other categories, themes of types of Wikipedia pages he makes. So he's not just into politics. He does a lot in sport, especially chess, world chess, and South African football, and then arts and literature, and mostly South African Afrikaans literature, and South African black musicians. So what you can see here, first off, not only is he sort of very diverse in what he's looking at, but he again represents a white male. He is a programmer, so he knows the ins and outs of Wikipedia. But I do just want to point to one more person. This guy is Sabaka, and Sabaka has much less information about him. All he's really interested in is preserving the Afrikaans language. And the reason I brought him in, originally the research was only going to be looking at English Wikipedia pages, but it turned out that a whole bunch of the political party pages, the only page that was available about them was in Afrikaans, and they had been created by this person. They'd created, and they range from almost anything. They are adamant that they are going to translate the whole of Wikipedia into Afrikaans. That is their main thing. And in fact, with Afrikaans Wikipedia, he is the fourth most prolific. Importantly, in terms of editing, he is the only person who edits these pages. Even bots don't go after the Afrikaans Wikipedia page. Unlike the English ones. So again, we've got just one voice coming through. Oh, can I finish? I've got one slide left. That's it. So I just say my takeaways is there any sort of bias? Well, yes, there is. It's content bias. And the most important one here is that it's the same people saying the same things, using the same sources. So essentially what's going to happen is that things that are written in other languages in South Africa, which has 12 official languages, is going to be left out of Wikipedia. And so just to cause a little bit of controversy, I did put at the end there that essentially what we see with the South African Wikipedia pages is that they remain a bastion of white privilege. Thanks.
Thank you. Can we clap for her, please? Thank you so much. That was really interesting. There's a reason that why we tell our students never to use Wikipedia as a source of information, and that just emphasizes on that fact. Okay, so we're going to preserve our questions towards the end. Next up is Dr. Dotto. Dr. Dotto Kuhenga, he's from the University of Dar es Salaam, and his presentation is Daily News and the Citizen newspapers, Reportage of the Tanzania Media Services Act, number 12 of 2016, Enactment process. Karibu sana.
Good afternoon. Well, maybe because of time, I can just start. As he said in the presentation. Well, basically, the study is actually the core work, the study. Me and Zuhura Mtatifikolo, who could not make it here, She works with the Parliament of Tanzania. And the study is about an analysis of daily news and the Citizen newspapers, Reportage of the Tanzanian Media Service Act, number 12 of 2016 enactment process from September to November 2016. That was the time this law was enacted. The process began a few years ago, but in 2016, that's when the enactment process actually took place. And towards the enactment, it was actually a very fast process, which actually took this month, and the Parliament discussed the bill for a very short time at that moment. And in November by the President of the United Republic of Tanzania, and there are so many issues and debates and conversations about the process, and therefore this study was done just because of the importance on looking at how the media took part in the discussions and the conversations. And as long as this was actually the law that relates to the media. So it was something to do with the legislation process, media legislation, but also it was something to do with the changing of the change because we have been having the law that existed for many years. I think the last media law was the Newspaper Act, which was have a very new law when it comes to especially the newspaper, but more importantly with regard to the media. And therefore, the key issues included, one, to understand power in this process. How did the media influence, at least the debates? How did it influence the key issues that were addressed within this Media Service Act? And the other issue included the concerns that were to do with how would this law now address the key issues that have been into the public domain, especially with the media in Tanzania. For instance, issues to do with defamation, issues to do with the independence of the media working, but also the professionalism of the journalists, and even issues to do with what kind of education, for instance, that will allow the journalists to be practicing as journalists, in terms of, for instance, whether they should have a bachelor degree or they should have a diploma and all that. So these were the key issues that actually surrounded the whole process. And therefore, the key objectives of this study, or maybe before that, but also the other concerns included issues to do with how the media now frame key issues that concern themselves. Because we have seen media doing a lot of framing on issues that are not concerned with the media, but rather they are concerned with other issues such as politics and all that. And therefore the other key issues was actually to look at how the media now frame issues that concern themselves, issues that concern journalists and all that. It's unfortunate that the presentation still cannot, but at least you can follow, right? Yeah, so the objective included, one, to look at the nature of the information that surrounded the that related to this, the objectivity, because this was the issue that concerns journalists, that concerns the media itself. Now, how far they were objective in reporting this particular process. And then lastly, in relation to that was actually the issue of what position did actually the media actually take. And therefore, looking at these two major newspapers, the Daily News, that is the public owned or government owned newspaper, but also the Citizen, which is a private owned with high reputation and high circulation, so to speak, were actually the key samples or the key case to look at the coverage. And the theory that guided the study, there were two theories. One is the popular agenda setting theory, but also the framing theory in relation to how now different aspects were framed by these newspapers at this particular time. Design, which actually included so much of content analysis, and the content analysis actually was on the articles and the editorials. And well, within the methodology, we even found some of the earlier findings, including that it was so surprising that these newspapers actually had a very few articles and editorials actually covering the issue that concerned them. And we found, because this process was now purposive, we found that there were only 10 articles in the 3 months. I mean from September, actually covered the enactment process, which actually 6 were from the Citizen and 4 were from the Daily News. And even another surprising issue was that there were no editorial, serious editorial actually dealing with the issue within these 2 newspapers. Now the findings in brief. One, in terms of the nature of the information, the 2 papers were instrumental, yes, in defining and describing media service, which was actually more of giving information about what the law would actually deal with. And they were in a way not so much biased, but they did not cover the very controversial issues, the key issues that most of the journalists, most of the media stakeholders would actually expect that these newspapers will be covering. But another thing in terms of objectivity, well, balancing in the news story was really hardly observed, whereby not because the newspaper lacked bias, but because the 2 avoided to make any serious allegations, serious concerns towards the government, towards the key stakeholders in terms of what actually the act will actually be dealing with. And even the sources and the facts and the opinions were facts that you just mentioned, that the law will be dealing with this and this. But looking at key issues, matters of fun within this newspaper were not that much actually covered, and therefore the framing was so kind of skeptical, like they were framing in a way that is more of following the already existing trajectory.
1 minute.
I think I'm in the last editions of the papers. One, as I said, there were no editorials when you look at these 2 newspapers, but also the articulation of the articles were more of just the hard news, the pyramid, you know, like following who said what was said and all that, without looking at other styles, other aspects that actually go into the key aspects. So definitely the coverage of the Media Service Act, yes, it was there of covering the critical aspects, the critical issues that were expected, it wasn't actually done as expected. But also, this has led also to more issues being discussed, and people now have been talking about a lot of issues. The conversation has been more on doing the amendment and also, removing some of the aspects and all that. And so we think this was because of how the coverage wasn't that much critical. And therefore, lastly, the recommendation is that media stakeholders in Tanzania need to be more prepared when it comes to participating in critical aspects or critical with the funds and all that, but also arguments backed with facts should actually be used so that issues to do with credibility, but also dealing or addressing issues that concern them should be done in a way that is more objective. And lastly, policymakers need to ensure that instead of just dictating what the rules should be, there should be more conversations, open and participatory procedures when it comes to different laws, not only media laws, but also other laws. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Dotto. That was also another interesting session, an interesting topic to look at, especially since you compared these two newspapers, a public newspaper and a private newspaper, with only 10 articles in 3 months. So that's interesting. Okay, so Amy, you're up next. So Amy here, as I said, Amy Larson, right? Yes, Amy Larson, she is the Director of Global Field Engagement and Strategic Projects Democracy Forward Team from Microsoft US. And her presentation is about abusive AI-generated harms and AI solutions to promote democracy. So, the 10 minutes are yours. Okay. Good afternoon.
Okay. Good afternoon. How is everyone doing? Good. It's so wonderful to be with you all. My name is Amy Larson, and I am strategic projects for Microsoft's Democracy Forward team. I'm here at the invitation of the U.S. Embassy, so thank you so much for that invitation. Be able to deep dive into a recent paper that Microsoft has published on protecting the public from abusive AI-generated content. And I wanted to take this opportunity to step back and look at a couple different examples across several different regions and several different aspects of the potential harm landscape as we are seeing it, and to share some of our insights, and obviously to continue to learn from all of you and your expertise as well. The mission of our team, by the way, is to preserve, protect, and advance the fundamentals of democracy by promoting a healthy information ecosystem, by safeguarding open and secure democratic processes, and for advocating for corporate civic responsibility. A little bit of context. I'm based in San Francisco, but Microsoft has been present in Africa for over 30 years. We have offices in 12 countries across the continent, including several of the countries that are represented here. We have more than 1,900 full-time employees and work with over 21,000 partners throughout Africa. And in the 3 decades since we've been here, we've invested in the tech ecosystem, including in cloud infrastructure, in development centers, in skilling and capacity building. We also have a sister initiative called the Airband Initiative that is working to close the connectivity gap throughout Africa and the world, including in the United States, and has committed to bringing broadband connectivity to over 100 million people, with a significant portion of those in East Africa. I think it's important to continue to remember that even as we push the cutting edge forward, there are about 2.7 billion people who still lack access to the internet, and about 700 million that don't actually have electricity yet. So there is so much we need to do to help everyone build on the promise of connectivity and new technologies, including AI. So we never lose sight of that in the work that we're doing either. So like all technologies, AI can create many opportunities, but in the hands of bad actors, obviously AI can also lead to harms, such as through the creation of deceptive synthetic content and deepfakes. Just so we're all on the same page, a deepfake is a fraudulent piece of content that can be an image, audio, or video that has been manipulated or created using AI. Often, this synthetic content is trying to replace a real person's voice or image, or both, for the purpose of deception or fraud or a scam. So this is not the filter you're putting on your pictures during your family vacation. So that's still totally fine because there's no bad intent there, right? If you're just making the lighting better and all of that, that's not what we're talking about. So even as we are working to democratize the many benefits of AI, we really have to consider how anti-democratic actors might deploy these same technologies against free and open societies. Some other findings from this paper, and this paper is really focused on protecting the public, and in particular, very vulnerable and targeted segments of the population, including women, children, voters, elderly, and consumers, from abusive AI-generated content. So we've outlined our approach in this recent policy paper. We describe how AI tools can now quite easily create highly realistic media that can deceive and manipulate individuals and communities. Now, this poses threats to societal trust and the integrity of information. This also creates real-world harms, tangible harms, like financial loss, exploitation, and the erosion of trust in digital content. Let me give a few examples. So in the US, we saw this recently in the context of elections when Elon Musk shared a manipulated video of presidential candidate Kamala Harris on X. And several months before that, there was an AI-generated robocall, a fake audio, of President Biden in New Hampshire before the primary election, where it sounded like he was telling Democrats not to vote. Well, of course, that's very inconsistent with his general messaging. So people figured that out pretty quickly that wasn't him. And also in October of last year, fraudsters used AI to impersonate the chair of the African Union. And last fall in Slovenia, a deepfake audio recording circulated in which one of the top candidates seemed to bring about rigging the election, and that went viral 2 days before the polls closed. That candidate lost a very close election. Another trend we're tracking is the rise in deepfakes as a form of online gender-based violence. In politics, online violence is significantly deterring women's political participation, with over 80% of women parliamentarians and elected officials reporting psychological violence because of this. Women also face harassment over 60% more frequently than men, and this is a real fear of having a chilling effect because 1 in 6 women leave politics globally now during their first term, citing some of this as a reason. We saw in Kenya recently a fairly poorly done deepfake video that implicated the Kenyan president and the new female head of the Ministry of Defense. So we're really concerned that this rise in AI deepfakes could shift the demographics of who runs for office, who stays in office, and the very fabric of a fully representative society. I want to also share one more story about the use of a deepfake in the corporate environment, and then tell you a bit about how Microsoft is approaching some of these problems with our technologies. In January of 2024, there was an employee of a Hong Kong branch of a big company, and he received a message from someone who said they were the chief financial officer, the CFO. So he joined a video call, and on the video call, he saw what seemed to be his other colleagues. But these were not his colleagues. They were actually deep-faked versions of his colleagues, taken from publicly available video. And during that meeting, they all agreed that this gentleman should agree to transfer millions of dollars, which he did. He transferred $25 million. That was a $25 million loss for the company. This highlights the growing sophistication of imposter scams using a lot of these technologies. Last year, they amounted to $2.7 billion in losses, with over a third of organizations around the world saying that they have encountered voice deep fake fraud attempts. So in our paper, we talk about a lot of different ways that we're trying to approach this challenge, and I'll talk even more about all of this tomorrow morning. So don't worry, we only have 2 minutes left, but there's a lot more. So please come back for the 8:45 a.m. keynote. There's more, for sure. But let me just overview how we're planning to address this problem from a broad framework perspective. So we've advocated, obviously, for a strong safety architecture that has to be applied at the AI platform level, the model level, application layers. We also advocate for aspects such as ongoing red team analysis, preemptive classifiers to detect potential threats, blocking abusive prompts, automated testing, media provenance. I'm going to talk about that tomorrow. Building out, and that really relies on the journalism community as well to help us implement and scale that to make it work. And watermarking, that is another way that we can build trust and integrity back into the images that people are seeing and the information environment more broadly, so that we don't lose trust and we don't allow AI to be the downfall of some of the systems and societies that we most value. We also advocate, obviously, banning users who abuse the system. So one of the things that we recommend is requiring providers of AI systems to label synthetic content, which is something that we've committed to doing and have been doing for a while now. So really simply, if an image is created by AI, we label it so that people know what they're looking at is AI generated. On the other hand, we can also help candidates and newsrooms and political campaigns to guard the integrity of their own source material and content by helping put on a digital watermark through content credentials. So just like when you're a journalist and you show up at a conference with your credential, that's how people know it's really you, and then you get to go in. This is a similar concept for media, so that people can have trust that what they are saying is actually believable and real, and it's very hard to manipulate. So there's a lot more that I'd like to discuss with you. I see that I am at my 10 minutes, so I want to be accountable to the time clock. But I'm really looking forward to continuing this discussion, to learning from you, and to sharing more about what we're doing during this conference. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you so much. You're the only presenter who actually followed the time. And we hope to hear more from you tomorrow morning, right? Yes. So we do have our final presenter, so Dr. Samuel Mwafisi. He's a legend in the media sector here in Tanzania. So please clap while he walks down. And Dr. Mwafisi is from Dar es Salaam's Tumaini University, Tanzania. It's called Iringa University now, right? Or it's still called Dar2. Okay, Dar2. So that's Tumaini University, Dar es Salaam. And he'll be talking about the interrelationship between media, democracy, and elections in Africa. Karibu.
Asante sana. When we are in this room, it's very difficult to know whether it's good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Therefore, I can only say jambo to all of you. My presentation is divided into two parts. The first part is going to be about the relationship between media, democracy, and elections in Africa. And the second part will be about how TBC, the public broadcaster in the country, covered multi-party elections. And that was a study I did for my PhD program, and I've made just a brief of it, not the entire paper. So most African countries achieved their independence in the early 60s, and most of them had multi-party political system before independence. However, not long after independence, they adopted a single-party political system that lasted for almost 3 decades up to early 1990s. The drive for introduction of multi-party political system in Africa factors. These factors were the limits of the single-party system, the emergence of alternative views about nature of the society and politics, and the global and regional trends in the 1980s. The crisis of the state was also caused by political shifts, bureaucratic incapability, and budget constraints. Included the Western world pressure on African countries to adapt the multi-party political system, the collapse of the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, which had provided a model and justification for single-party system in many African countries. After they had established the political party system, African countries held multi-party institution of democracy. Most of these countries, as of last year, have had more than 4 successive multi-party elections. Tanzania is going to have its 7th multi-party elections next year, 2025. But the studies have shown that the inception of multi-party politics in Africa has instigated liberalization and created incentive for politicians to foster the expansion of depending on democracy in the African countries. Study has also shown that repetitive multi-party elections have contributed to increasing the democratic equalities of political regimes and the broadening and deepening of civil liberties in African countries. Multi-party elections have given citizens meaningful choices of choosing leaders of their own choice. That multi-party election did not have flaws. Elections an hour about parties to parade democratic credentials without reforming their regimes. It is also a conviction that Africans had high expectations of what multi-party democracy could establish in Africa in terms of democracy. We believe that they were witnessing a new era in which they will have more democracy than before during the. Despite the repetitive multi-party elections, in most cases, incumbent leaders have found ways to win election without opening for extensive political liberalization and participations. Although political reforms and civil rights have been formally recognized, they are imperfectly observed in practice, particularly in between general elections. Therefore, the lessons so far from the most African countries is experience is that democracy can be possible without being democratic. When we come to the concept, a lot of one Professor Jacobus from, I think it was somewhere in the Eastern countries, says that democracy is a system of government that assigns the ultimate responsible to the public to decide how to they wishes to believe, but the republic is flexible when it makes that independence. Therefore, the media during elections process is obliged to empower the people by providing them with civic education and the candidates for which they vote. The external principles of the essential principles of democracy are the rule of law, respect for human rights, protection of basic human rights, popular participation in the government system, and transparency and accountability in the public policies and decisions that make in the management of the state and the for media plays a very significant role in the proper functioning of democracy. Watchdog ensuring greater transparency and accountability, providing citizens with information on their candidates, political policies, electoral process, and enabling them to make informed decisions when they cast their votes or engage in public divisions. Media also offer a platform for candidates and voters to discuss important issues concerning matters of great importance or of interest to them. These issues, including among other policies, the Electoral Management Commission. Therefore, the media are essential to democracy, and free, fair, and credible elections process is impossible. So I'll go to the second part, which is the role of public broadcasting during the elections. And I've taken the TBC as a case study. Tanzania Broadcasting Corporation is the only public broadcaster in Tanzanian mainland. We have another public broadcaster in Zanzibar, but I'm dealing with the one in mainland only. And one scholar said that since public broadcasting services is tasked with the responsibility of serving the public interest, they need to have editorial independence to carry out their public interest effectively. And editorial independence has been defined by many people, but the one that I've chosen is the freedom of the editor to decide on editorial matters independently without interference from outside. Therefore, the study assesses the objectivity of TBC editorial content and government political party influence on TBC editorial content during the presidential elections. So the research findings, which I've just briefed you, otherwise it was very much detailed, in the 4 multi-party elections since 1995 to 2000, our interview or took part in the group discussions, admitted that TBC coverage of the presidential election was biased in favor of the presidential candidates of the ruling party. Research finding provided the following reason for this bias: the financial power. The study found that factors responsible for the big coverage in favor of the presidential candidates of the ruling party. Study has proved, for the one by Mariam Kono, that a political party that has financial power has a vital advantage compared to the other parties. Then there was a limitation of the budget of TBC, its own budget, which was allocated from the government, and therefore it could not cover all the areas in Tanzania. And that one, because of the limitation of that finances, they just selected some few areas that they could cover. There was also a shortage of human resources and equipment. They could not cover all the presidential candidates because they had short of human resources, they had shortage of cameras, equipment, and whatever. And that also caused the biasness, because they did not cover the other parties as much as the ruling party. The other factor is the status of TBC employers as civil servants. These guys, as civil servants, they could not afford to not to report the presidential candidates. They had more coverage of the presidential candidate than any other president. Presidential candidates of the ruling party and the other political parties, they choose to go with the presidential party of the ruling party. But then one national leader said it's impossible, or it's difficult for a national sponsored, state supported to leave the presidential candidate of the government and cover the other opposition parties. But the other fact was mistrust of the opposition leaders. They did not of the public corporation. There are many. The other one is a leader, a national leader of a political party, who were invited in the studio during the 3 months of electoral campaign, and he sat there, but when the camera was ready to record, he stood up and walked out of the studio. These guys in the TBC thought he had gone out for a short call of nature, but only to find out he has gone home. He has left the place. And when he was to lower my prestige before my voters. There was a Secretary General of a opposition party who alleged that parliamentary candidates has refused to be interviewed by journalists from the state-owned media because they had what he called hypotheses that they wanted to prove. They would go there with questions that they just wanted to prove that they would not be free to ask the people ordinary questions, but they would ask questions that would find them a better answer for them. Oh. And the public broadcaster will always broadcast them into slow news stories, and that one may give you a little more time. There were many successful campaigners for the presidential candidates, and then there was self-censorship in the newsroom. Then there was government and the political influences in the whatever. That is, for example, the leaders of local governments are members of the ruling party, and therefore they would say that a certain public meeting has not been. The opposition party were not there, or did not hold their elections. Oh, she's very much concerned about time, so let me stop there, because, or let me go to the conclusion maybe. So elections are cornerstone of democracy to empower the people by providing them with civic education that will enable them to take important independent decisions on the candidates they want to vote. Ensuring greater transparency and accountability. Although TBC is an autonomous public broadcaster with editorial independence, its editorial independence is being compromised mainly by the structural bias, self-censorship, and to a lesser extent, the partisan bias and the laws. These are responsible for BBC-based biased editorial content which favored the ruling party and the presidential candidates of the ruling party. Public broadcasting thus broaden and deepen democracy in Africa. Ultimately, most public broadcasting in Africa lack editorial independence because although legally they are public broadcasters, in practice they are state broadcasters. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. You know, when you're a legend, you have some priorities over others, such as going just a little bit beyond time, so that's fine. Okay, so have around and something. Sandra Picture talked about basically Wikipedia. Where is she? Oh, you're there. I was looking for you here. Okay, she basically talked about Wikipedia and all the political pages in South Africa. We had Doto Kuhenga and Zuhura Mtatifkolo. We talked about the news and the Citizen newspaper and their coverage of the Media Services Act. And we had Amy Larson from Microsoft, a very interesting presentation about AI and deepfakes and how it affects society and political outcomes in general. And then Dr. Samuel Mwafisi, also with an interesting presentation about the Tanzania, well, democracy in Africa, and then zeroing in the Tanzania Broadcasting Corporation, TBC, which I always use to ask a question, is it a public broadcaster or a government broadcaster? I'm still not clear on what's the difference. Anyway, I'm going to leave to open questions to the floor. So if there are any questions, please ask them now and then they'll respond later after we've gathered all of the questions. So do we have any questions or comments? Anyone? Okay. Yes?
Yes, first of all, I would like to thank the presenters, previous presenters, for the good work done. My comment is goes to the last presenter. Is not possible. Two words, actually. I would like him to say that a free and fair election is not possible without a vibrant and independent that is media, but if it's not vibrant and independent, you cannot have a free and fair election. So I just wanted to contribute that. Thank you.
Questions or comments, contributions? Okay, yes.
Thank you. I also will ask a question to the first presenter, Dr. Sandra Pitcher. Based on these findings, which are quite intriguing, what would you recommend as a way of addressing inequalities, especially given that we have quite a significant portion of our know-how on how to critically evaluate the content? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Any other questions? Yes?
I'd like to ask last presenter, does he truly think that the model of public broadcasting can work in the political dispute? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have any more questions? We have 3 right now. No questions? Okay.
Sorry.
Sandra.
I want to ask about the last presentation. Oh. If the public broadcasting TBC, if there is no law or obligations due to be somehow fair in covering campaigns between political parties without giving more time to ruling party.
Okay, thank you. There's a question there.
Anyway, I just wanted to know, I think it's great that Microsoft is thinking about dealing with deepfake in the way that you've suggested. I think that it's really interesting. What I'd like to know, though, and I think others in the room who are journalists would like to know sort of, you teach it's AI without the permission of journalists and creators, and is there something in place to help deal with that ethical problem? Thanks.
I'll add the 6th one to Dotto. News in 3 months. So you looked at which is a newspaper, and then the Citizen. The Citizen had, right? And Daily News had 4. Now, did you expect the Daily News to have more if it government act, just because they're the media, but then they're or how would have they gotten out of that? Okay, so Dr. Mofisi, you have the most questions, so I'm going to. So there's the first one asks about the if it's possible. You say pardon? Also, it was just a comment that not just free and fair, but they need to be vibrant and so and so. So that was just a comment, but there is a question. The mode of public broadcasting, can it work in Africa?
It cannot work the way it is expected to work, because most African governments and their the ruling parties, they have not allowed the public broadcasters to act as public broadcasters. For example, TBC, if you read their law, the law establishing TBC, all the principles there are principles of public broadcasters. And if it was organization, it could have been more than what it is today. But unfortunately, that's what I'm saying. Legally, it's like public broadcasters. But theoretically, it's a state broadcaster. And to make the difference is that the public broadcaster actually is answerable to the public, whereas the state broadcasting is answerable to the state. So when you make a public broadcaster, it cannot work properly. And once it tries, there are cases where, for example, in the last elections, it was very independent, and yet the managing editor, the managing director had some problems with that kind of things. So broadcasters, if it is being allowed to work according to the law establishing it.
Dr. Mofisi, you used to be the director of TBC.
I didn't want to say that.
And you have not mentioned it.
I didn't want to say that. Okay.
When you were there, were you fair? Did you try? Did you have some challenges?
Mm-hmm. And that's why my studies on the territorial independence. Is there a law for the public broadcaster to cover all parties during elections? We have that law, which says during the 3 months is free and should be accessible to all the political parties. And actually would be called by the chairman of the pro-commissioner, and they will say during this period, the 3 months, you are answerable to our commission. So you have to give them the opposition parties free time. And at least I remember as long as they don't use abusive language. But then when it comes to the realities, we did our best to establish committees and make sure that we are biased. So I asked, what's happened? Because I was the chairman of this committee that was supposed to work to ensure that TBC during the 3 months of political campaigns is independent, but it did not happen. So when I did the research, those are some of the things that have come up. Not to be independent and not to be biased because of the factors that I've simply mentioned here.
Thank you. So he's already answered the other question, if there are any laws or regulations during elections for public broadcasters on campaigns. So that has been answered. Okay, the next question is for Sandra. What would you recommend?
Okay, so I'm very... It was essentially open to look at the academics in the room and say, teach your students. But what I would say more seriously is that there are Wikimedia do what they call open callings, and they bring people in from local communities to teach them how to use Wikipedia and best ways of doing it in more diverse parts of the world. It is at the moment in Africa. I know recently there was one in Cape Town, and for those of you that are from South Africa know Cape Town is incredibly elite compared to the rest of the country. And it would be very useful if these types of things were set up in other parts of Africa in more diverse places with more languages. Because at the moment, what my other research is looking at is language and the use of language on Wikipedia. And the South African indigenous languages are very small. And these really need to be developed more. But even then, you see the differences in the content. And again, there is author bias because of what people that learn how to use it, the better it's going to become. I'm very much an advocate for, I'm not saying Wikipedia is a completely bad thing. It does have its uses. But the more of us that can use it and know how to use it and to judge it, the better it's going to get and the more useful it's going to get. And yeah, as a final thought, it is more reliable and more accurate than the Encyclopedia Britannica is anymore. So yeah, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Amy. What is Microsoft's position using AI to teach AI?
Thank you for the question. I appreciate it. I wanted to share a couple things in response to that question. So one thing that I wanted to share is that our responsible AI team, even though ChatGPT has kind of just become kind of popularized within the last year and a half or so, our responsible AI team has been in existence for about 8 years. So we've been thinking really hard and carefully, very, very long before this has kind of hard with the product teams to follow. Obviously a lot of this is an ongoing conversation, but if you look at those principles, they're fairness, reliability and safety, privacy and security, inclusiveness, transparency and responsibility. And they're really they're not just words. I think people, from what I've seen, and my team doesn't work on this as much, but from when I've interacted with people working on these teams, they take this very seriously, and it's an exciting time, but obviously want to do the right thing. And also in terms of the part of your question about resources for journalists, we actually have a journalism hub that includes a lot of different resources to help journalists and newsrooms, and also works with newsrooms. We've trained over 1,000 journalists around the world on how to use AI to increase their productivity so that they're able to do more of the things that they want to do and spend less time doing things that are less fun, like transcribing and things like that. And I actually brought a printout. I'm so glad you actually asked this question. It reminded me. I have a printout about the Journalism Hub, and also including a free cybersecurity training for journalists that we put together. It's 45 minutes long and available to everyone. So I encourage everyone to pick up one of these one-pagers that I'll try to leave outside tomorrow. We really want to protect journalists, especially as key parts of democracy, key stakeholders in democracy and the information environment.
Thank you. The final question is what I asked Otto. Remember what I asked you?
Yes, I remember.
Okay.
Whether be critical to the enactment process of the Media Service Act. Yes and no. Because actually assume that this is a government newspaper, the public-owned newspaper, and therefore we have this sense of having that it will be just be more positive of the government and all that. And that has been through experience, whereby you find most of these, as the case of TBC, but also the Daily News, and of currently Habari Leo, which is a Swahili one, the recent one. But yes, because of maybe 2 or 3 reasons. The first reason is that these newspapers, even the TBC, they post themselves through the media house style, the media house policy, that, well, we are for the public, and therefore we attract, or we are opinions, and therefore at least we could give the benefit of doubt that they will work around that particular notion. But second, looking at the comparison, that we expect that the government newspaper, the public newspaper, will be critical of the government program, that's all. But the more surprising thing is that you find also even the private media, like what the case of the Citizen, as we found, will be also the same as critical of the government. And therefore the comparison will be even very private, even more sympathetic of the government, more than even the government. That's why we had that kind of research, so that we can work on it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. So we have run out of time. We need to end our session, and we've finished answering all of the questions. So I would like us to give a round of applause to all of our presenters. Thank you for being amazing. I don't know who to give the mic to. Nkoko, who do I give the mic to? Huh? There's another session? Oh.